The Nuremberg trials not only marked an end to World War II and a triumph over Nazi war criminals, but proved to be a stepping stone in the development of global cooperation and international criminal law. The trials marked a turning point in the global legal landscape, leaving an impact that would affect the world in the decades to come. The International Military Tribunal established at Nuremberg set a precedent, influencing the subsequent trials in Yugoslavia and Rwanda, and even up to present-day contemporary issues with the indictment of Vladimir Putin by the International Criminal Court. The idea of an international tribunal to try war criminals is not confined to World War II. Years prior, in the aftermath of the First World War, the leaders of France and the United Kingdom, as well as other European nations, hoped the war would be used to help bolster international cooperation. The Paris Peace Conference saw a strong push for the prosecution of World War I war criminals, but floundered on the rocks of American opposition. It wouldn't be until after World War II and the war crimes committed by the Nazi regime that the international community would seek to address the situation. The atrocities committed by the Nazis were not isolated actions of one lone military commander, but instead encompassed a systematic and widespread genocide driven by the goal of eradicating what the Nazis deemed inferior races. Today, this genocide would become known as the Holocaust. At the Moscow Conference in October of 1943, the Allied powers officially recognized the atrocities being committed by the Nazis and vowed to prosecute those responsible. Franklin Roosevelt, then President of the United States, commented on the situation, saying, "None who participated in these acts of savagery shall go unpunished. All who share in the guilt shall share in the punishment." The Moscow Conference had only acknowledged that the crimes were being committed, but laid no groundwork for how the Nazi perpetrators would be prosecuted. Individuals like British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and U.S. Secretary of Treasury Henry Morgenthau hoped for all top Nazis to be killed. However, when the public heard news of this plan, they were outraged and desired a more humane option. Around the same time, plans for an international tribunal had begun to advance, with the hope that international cooperation would be the answer to the world's underlying problem. On August 8, 1945, the major Allied powers, including Great Britain, the United States, France, and the Soviet Union, signed the London Charter, which serves as the basis for the trials at Nuremberg. The Charter established crimes the defendants could be charged with, including crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The future chief prosecutor for the United States, Robert H. Jackson, who helped establish the Charter, said in his opening statement at the Nuremberg trials, "We must never forget that the record on which we judge these defendants today is the record on which history will judge us tomorrow. To pass these defendants a poisoned chalice is to put it to our own lips as well." The London Charter laid the groundwork for the eventual Nuremberg trials and how the trials would be conducted.
The Nuremberg trials commenced on November 20th, 1945 with the trial of major war criminals. United States Supreme Court Justice Robert H. Jackson spearheaded these historic proceedings, personally selected by American President Harry S. Truman to be the chief prosecutor for the United States at the Nuremberg trials. Jackson viewed his selection as chief prosecutor as both a tremendous honor but also a grave responsibility. Judges and prosecutors from the Soviet Union, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States presided over the cases of 22 out of the 24 indicted Nazi defendants as well as 6 Nazi organizations. The defendants were chosen because they represented the Nazi diplomatic, economic, political, and military leadership. Robert Ley, one of the 2 individuals not brought to trial, oversaw labor efforts during the war but committed suicide while in custody. Gustav Krupp, another absentee, was deemed too unwell to stand trial. Additionally, Martin Bormann, another defendant not present, was tried and convicted in absentia due to his body never being found. The remaining defendants were either charged with crimes against humanity, war crimes, or crimes against peace. Among them, 3 were acquitted while 19 were convicted. Sentences varied. 3 received life imprisonment, 4 were sentenced to 10 to 20 years, and 12 faced capital punishment. The trial of major war criminals concluded in under a year, wrapping up on October 1st, 1946. Over the course of the trial, thousands of different documents, eyewitness testimonies, and personal accounts were used as evidence to expose the true extent of Nazi crimes and give spectators a glimpse into the horrors of the Nazi regime. Evidence ranged from the Nuremberg laws of 1935, which dehumanized German Jews and stripped away many of their basic rights, to the Wannsee Conference, which outlined Nazi plans to exterminate European Jews, as well as concentration camp footage showing humanity at one of its darkest hours. Following the trial of major war criminals, 12 additional trials took place between December 1946 and April 1949. However, these additional trials were not heard by an international tribunal and were tried under U.S. courts with American jurisdiction. In total, 199 defendants were tried during the Nuremberg trials, resulting in 161 convictions, with 37 of those convicted sentenced to death.
In the opinion of the tribunal, the solemn renunciation of war as an instrument of national policy necessarily involves the proposition that such a war is illegal in international law, and that those who plan and wage such a war, with its inevitable and terrible consequences, are committing a crime in so doing.
The Nuremberg trials are often seen as a landmark in political justice and judicial proceedings, being the first time where defendants were tried in front of an international tribunal. However, the trials were heavily criticized. The general public and American political scholars like George A. Finch and Herbert Wechsler viewed the trials as merely a victor's justice and called out Allied nations for being hypocritical. Newspapers like the Chicago Star attacked the trial for dismissing seemingly guilty Nazi Party members. American attorneys called out the trial for the immunity it gave Allied nations and if the court even had the power to make these decisions, and others doubted the trial would have any real long-lasting impact. However, decades later, the impact of Nuremberg would begin to be felt. The standards set after Nuremberg influenced the world's view on human rights, swaying opinions at key agreements such as the Genocide Convention, Geneva Convention on the Laws of War, and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. The trials defined crimes under international law and what individuals could be charged with. In the same year as Nuremberg, the Tokyo trials were set up by the United States in order to prosecute Japanese officials of crimes against humanity. The Tokyo trials had major references to Nuremberg and its definition of crimes against humanity. The international rules created in the course of the Nuremberg trials formed the basis for subsequent changes to the Geneva Conventions and the United Nations Report on the Principles of International Law recognized in the Charter of the Nuremberg Tribunal and the judgment of the Tribunal in 1950.
The fragile peace in Yugoslavia is more fragile than ever. Truce talks between federal officials and the Republic of Slovenia broke down again today.
Thousands upon thousands of people fleeing the war-torn capital of Kigali arrive here in Ruangu, trying to escape the war.
After the 1990 to 2001 Yugoslavian War and Rwandan genocide in 1994, the international community responded with the establishing specialized tribunals. In the former Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia was established to investigate alleged war crimes that had occurred during the war. In Rwanda, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was formed to try individuals responsible for the Rwandan genocide. The establishment of the two courts and their definitions for human rights and crimes against humanity were based on the Nuremberg trials. However, after these trials ended, the respective tribunal covering the trial also ended, and the United Nations realized a permanent international court system needed to be established, and in 2002, the International Criminal Court, or ICC, was created. The ICC is supposed to hold those guilty of some of the world's worst crimes. Over the 20 years that the ICC has been in session, it has indicted over 52 people. Some include Muammar al-Gaddafi, former Libyan president suspected of killing unarmed protesters, Omar al-Bashir, former president of Sudan, is suspected of planning genocide in Sudan's Darfur region, and recently Vladimir Putin, the current president of Russia, charged with deporting Ukrainian children into the Russian Federation.
Today, 17th of March 2023, the International Criminal Court has issued 2 warrants of arrest in the Ukraine situation. For Vladimir Putin, President of the Russian Federation, and for Maria Lvova-Belova, Commissioner of the Russian President for Children's Rights, for the alleged war crimes of deportation of children from Ukrainian occupied territories into the Russian Federation.
However, the ICC's ability to arrest Putin is hindered by their limited jurisdiction, being confined to nations that recognize the ICC as a court. Nuremberg created a precedent of charging the guilty of war crimes, and the ICC has carried that precedent on to the present day.
The Nuremberg trials proved to be a turning point in the development of international law, defining human rights for many different conventions, and changing the legal landscape for conducting trials towards people who have violated human rights. Even though the Nuremberg trials started as a way to prosecute Nazi war criminals, it quickly turned to an anchor of international law.